and we will go ahead and get started. The Certified Angus Beef brand has truly been a grassroots initiative from the very beginning. When the brand started more than 40 years ago, it was founded by Angus breeders, Angus cattlemen and women who said, we need to do better, better in terms of raising high quality cattle that meet consumer expectations, and better in terms of offering the consumer a higher level of confidence that they can receive something that meets their consistent quality expectations every single time. Fast forward more than 40 years, and we're still the brand that is governed by Angus breeders today. Of all the different Angus brands that are out there, the Certified Angus Beef brand is the only one that is owned and operated by the American Angus Association. We are a not-for-profit arm of the American Angus Association, meaning that we take no dollars from registration fees, no dollars from transfers, no dollars from any membership. Everything that funds the brand is through packer paid commissions by being able to sell that product at a higher price in the market. Excuse me. They are able to turn around and pay the brand a commission, which in turn funds all of the marketing and education resources. So that's something we're very, very proud of as a brand, and the fact that we do not take any dollars out of the pocket of cattle producers, and instead are driving those Certified Angus Beef premiums back into the pocket of producers through the consumer demand that we are able to build through our partners. The way that we build that demand is by ultimately meeting our brand promise to consumers and our licensees who serve them by having a consistent premium product every single time. Brand integrity is incredibly important to us. It's the #1 way that we are able to maintain our brand standards and make sure that the consumer continues to have that level of confidence. Excuse me. This graph does give you guys a quick snapshot of where we are from a brand sales perspective. Now, today we're having this conversation late in 2020. Obviously, things have been a little bit off this year. It was the 5th consecutive year that the Certified Angus Beef brand has merchandised in excess of 1 billion pounds across the globe. Obviously, with the onset of COVID-19, excuse me, things have taken a little bit of a turn, especially in the food service business. If we divide that total number of sales out for the entire fiscal year of 2020, which our fiscal year runs from October 1st through September 30th, better than half of our business this past year was in retail. But this is something that is very important from a diversity perspective in terms of how the brand is diverse in touching both retail and food service business. We know this is important in terms of driving value across the entire carcass. We know that food service businesses typically utilize different cuts of beef in many cases than what we see at the retail meat case. The same would be very true for international. And so as a brand, we see that it's most healthy to have a diverse portfolio, if you will, in terms of the type of business that we've had. And if there was a silver lining in 2020 whatsoever, it was simply the fact that where food service fell short as the restaurant industry unfortunately took a nosedive out of anyone's control, and we saw spikes in sales from a retail perspective. When consumers are stockpiling their freezers and their refrigerators, we know that they still want quality. They're still seeking a brand that gives them a high level of confidence in the quality of the product that they're bringing home. Earlier, I mentioned the idea of having brand integrity, and this integrity tracking system is really what allows the Certified Angus Beef brand to have that. We are unique in the fact that we are the only branded product that is tracking every pound from packing plant all the way through our end users. This graph gives you some perspective about how that product flows. Obviously, having that diverse portfolio of food service, retail, international, there are a lot of different places that product can go once it leaves the packing plant. And we are unique in the fact that as a brand, as a company, Certified Angus Beef never owns a pound of product. We never own cattle. So if you call and say, hey, is Certified Angus Beef interested in buying my cattle? We can't do that. We never get involved at any point in the price structure or in determining who you must or must not sell cattle to. We do have a licensed chain of outlets that we have approved to utilize our logos along the way. But there are a broad range of companies across all of these different outlets that ultimately allows us to make sure that anyone who is licensed for our federally registered trademarks is in fact buying the product that they say. We make sure that at no point along the way is any distributor, processor, retailer, restaurant, they can't be selling more product than they're buying. We know the math doesn't add up on that. And so this integrity tracking system does allow us to really audit that on a monthly basis and make sure that the product that goes out with our logo on it is in fact what that business says it is. So you might ask, as a brand who never owns product, as a brand who never buys or sells cattle, how do we ultimately drive sales? And truly, this is a matter of making sure that our customers remain successful. We create demand for those high quality Angus cattle by creating a pull-through approach. Our ultimate goal is for consumers to seek that brand name. And the way we do that is to make sure that they are asking for that repeat eating experience. And the way that we get a repeat eating experience is by satisfying them on the front end through having a consistent quality product. Again, whether they're purchasing that at their local meat case through a retailer, whether they see that Certified Angus Beef logo on a restaurant menu, in either one of those applications, we want to make sure we have that high quality so that we are creating that pull-through demand. Obviously, in order to make sure we're measuring that and know we're doing a good job, we have to do continued consumer research. Today, we know that roughly 95% of consumers recognize the brand logo. And it's not just about brand recognition. It's about consumer recognition that affiliates the logo with quality. We know consumers see our logo as a brand that represents quality to them. And we've done research that indicates consumers are willing to drive a little bit further for a grocery store or a restaurant that carries the Certified Angus Beef logo with our product. And we know they're willing to pay a higher premium for the Certified Angus Beef brand because quality matters to them. These are all things that, again, that integrity tracking system and that consistent quality all come together to make sure we continue to drive. And ultimately, when the consumer recognizes our logo and affiliates it with quality, we are able to achieve our overall mission statement, which as a brand is all about increasing that demand for registered Angus cattle through the specification-based program. Now, realizing that not every animal that winds up in a Certified Angus Beef box is a registered Angus animal, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. This is where that pull-through demand comes into play and is so very important. When the consumer is willing to pay more, we know the packer is willing to pay more for those high quality Angus influenced feeder calves. When the feeder is willing to pay more for those calves, we know that the commercial cow-calf producer is willing to in turn pay more for high quality registered Angus bulls in order to upgrade the quality of the calves that they're weaning off every year. And so while many pieces of this beef supply chain can feel very segmented, we know that they're all very directly tied together in terms of achieving that overall mission statement. Now, when we talk about Angus, we know that Angus is a great breed of cattle, but the word Angus in and of itself is not a guaranteed quality level of beef. And if you're in Angus cattle production, you know that not all Angus cattle are created equal. We have different traits, different bloodlines that achieve different things. And because not all Angus cattle are created equal, we also know that not all Angus beef is created equal. In fact, when we look at the overall number of Angus influenced calves that go into a packing plant, only about 3 in 10 are going to ultimately meet all 10 of the standards for the Certified Angus Beef brand. We know that delivering exceptional taste is far more important to the consumer than necessarily guaranteeing a percent of any kind of breed composition. That overall taste and flavor is the most mission critical to our brand. And the way we achieve that is by measuring those Angus identified cattle at the packing plant against these 10 science-based specifications. When we talk about that 3 in 10 Angus cattle qualify, these are the 10 specifications that they have to go through. This is the filter that we apply to all of those carcasses to make sure that we are achieving the utmost quality and consistency for the consumer. Now, I realize you guys didn't tune in today for a full-on Meat Science 509. We're not going to walk through all 10 of these, but we will spend a little bit of time here in a minute talking about which of these specifications are most influential in filtering cattle in or out of the Certified Angus Beef brand, and some of those that are especially relevant to cattle producers as we look at increasing our overall acceptance rate of those Angus influenced calves that ultimately meet all 10 of the brand standards. A minute ago, I mentioned that Angus itself is not a standard of quality. And I think when we take a step back and look at all of the different USDA certified brands that are out there today, it becomes very telling. We know that Angus confusion is very real to the consumer in the marketplace today. And that's why as a brand, we are so persistent about protecting our trademarks, whether it's the logo itself, whether it's that 3-word phrase. We know that there are over 70 different brands of USDA certified programs today that have the word Angus in them. And 18 of them have a modest or higher marbling specification, which would be the same as the minimum marbling specification for certified Angus beef. It's why all 10 of those standards are so very important to us. Again, it's why that tracking system is very important to us. When we break out those certified brands even further, this gives you guys a little bit better perspective about where all those different Angus programs fall on the quality spectrum. We have high quality Angus programs. We have low quality Angus programs. My guess is if you were to walk into your local department store today, you could probably find a dog food brand that would call out Angus beef. We know that the Certified Angus Beef brand customer is very discerning. They know the difference between a low quality Angus that can be labeled on some kind of pet food versus something that we have that's got all 10 of our standards and our tracking behind it. But this is why, if you call in and visit with us as a brand, and we're so very persistent about that brand name, because just talking about Angus beef isn't good enough for the customer today. And so it can't be good enough for us as a program. So I want to dive into I would say hands down, the most frequently asked question that our Cattleman Connection team gets from producers is in some form or fashion rooted back to this. How do cattle become certified Angus beef? That question may come in the form of, how do I certify my herd? How do I sign up as a certified Angus beef producer? I have cattle that I want to sell to certified Angus beef. And while in and of themselves, many of those questions are very unique, they all ultimately come back to a solid understanding of how we go from having high quality Angus cattle to having high quality certified Angus beef that winds up in a box. So that's a process that I'd like to walk through. And again, encourage you, if you have questions or specific thoughts throughout, please feel free to go ahead and drop those into the Q&A box. So step one, the first threshold that we have to cross in order for cattle to receive that certified Angus beef logo is that they do have to be sold to a licensed packer. Now, again, certified Angus beef does not own any packing plants. We don't even have employees that work in packing plants. We extend our license to USDA inspected and graded plants across the country that are licensed to apply those 10 standards to the carcasses when they come across the rail. Now, I think this is an important point to stop and talk a little bit about the difference between two different key roles within USDA. It's important to know the difference between the role of one, a USDA grader, and two, the role of a USDA inspector. There are a lot of plants across the country, both large and small, that are USDA inspected. You have to understand, USDA inspection is there to evaluate for food safety, for wholesomeness, cleanliness, and inspection. USDA inspection is paid for by you and I through our tax dollars. When we think about the role of a USDA grader is not required at all packing facilities across the country. Grading is an optional service that the plant pays an additional fee for to have that USDA grader there to not evaluate for wholesomeness or food safety, but they are evaluating that carcass for quality. It is the job of the USDA grader, oftentimes in conjunction with approved camera technology, to apply the 10 standards for certified Angus beef to those carcasses. So if a plant is not a USDA graded facility, it is not a certified Angus beef licensed packing plant. That also doesn't automatically mean that all packing plants that have a USDA grader are licensed for certified Angus beef, but we do work with more than 85% of the North American packer base that have USDA graders involved. And so the map that you see here is a map of the entire country of all packing plants that would be licensed to evaluate carcasses for certified Angus beef. Again, this is step one. So when we get questions about local freezer beef programs, a lot of smaller plants, again, know that that this is a threshold that we have to be able to cross, because if those cattle aren't going into a licensed packing plant, it's not possible to put them into a certified Angus beef box. Even if you're selling some cattle into a licensed packing plant and then selling their group mates, their steer or heifer mates into a smaller plant, we still cannot, we can't put the certified Angus beef logo on them because we don't certify any live cattle. No cattle get the brand before that hide comes off, and everyone is evaluated on an individual basis by that USDA grader for all 10 of those standards. So once those cattle are sold into a licensed packing plant, they will be identified at the plant as being Angus type. Now, you may have heard 51% black hided or greater. If that is something that you've had stamped into your mind, my number one request of you today is that that you erase that, because that's one, it's not true, and two, it's not even written into the USDA standards today. Today, the way we identify those cattle as being Angus type at the packing plant is that they do have to be predominantly solid black hided. And what that means is that the entire animal, from behind the point of the shoulder, above the flank, and in front of the tail head, must be a solid black hide. Now, we realize that there are other breeds of cattle out there today that are black hided. We know that in many cases there's some kind of Angus influence that got them that way. But again, this is the initial threshold. We have research and data that indicates the higher your Angus influence, the higher your certified Angus beef acceptance rate is going to be. But this is simply the visual to even consider them as candidates. Again, this is all before we apply those 10 standards. It is more than just a black hide. Those cattle are simply identified as Angus type, like this, in order to be evaluated for those 10 standards. Now, because we know that the USDA grader is not going to be evaluating that carcass with the hide still on it, those carcasses will receive some kind of a permanent ink marker that they've been identified as Angus type. The old school way would be to have that A stamp or that Angus type up on the round. There are a handful of plants that still do that today. However, most of them have moved that ink higher up onto the hock, simply because it's less trim on a less valuable retail cut. But those carcasses would be railed off separately, so that when anything that comes to that plant with one of these two marks on it, the USDA grader knows this animal can be considered for the 10 certified Angus beef specifications. And of all of the carcasses that receive that A stamp or that blue mark up on the hock to identify them as Angus type, only about 35% are going to make the cut. So again, when we talk about that visual identifier, that's just the beginning. We've got to filter a lot through, and we have a lot of those Angus identified animals that miss all 10 of our brand standards. Now, earlier I showed you that list of all 10 of the specifications, and I promised you that we weren't going to walk through each of them, but I do think it's worth slowing down to take a minute to look at of all these cattle that don't make the brand, those black-hided cattle that miss the brand. These 4 specifications are the top 4 most frequently missed specifications by those Angus influence cattle. The top left-hand corner is referencing our marbling spec, that modest or higher marbling spec. We do have a ribeye sizing specification of 10 to 16 square inches, with the majority of cattle that miss being an excess on the high end. We also have a carcass weight spec of no greater than 1,050 pounds for that hot carcass weight. and any back fat thickness must be 1 inch or less. Now, I bring up these 4 specifications because they are the most frequently missed, but I think it's important to also quantify them and talk about the vast differences between the frequency in which cattle miss those specifications. Remember that top left-hand corner I mentioned is marbling? You can see here, far and away, more than 92% of those Angus influenced cattle that miss our brand standards miss getting that certified Angus beef stamp because they don't have enough marbling to them. So if you're ever reading materials from Certified Angus Beef, you're following along with our Cattleman Connection channels and you think, gosh, all these people talk about is marbling, marbling, marbling. This is why. It's not because we believe in single trait selection. We know that you have a lot of different traits that are very important to both a registered or a commercial cow herd. The reason we talk about marbling so much, it's not because we think it's the only trait you need to pay attention to. It's because it's the #1 place where there's money left on the table because a producer missed out on their Certified Angus Beef premiums because they did not have enough marbling to them. And there's a big discrepancy between that #1 spec that gets missed and #2. Now, if you're quick at math, you're likely looking at these numbers and thinking, Kara, you can't add because this adds up to more than 100%. And you would be right. But the reason for that is that we would have some carcasses that would fall into this data that might miss our specifications by more than one. So it could be the case that you have a carcass that is also deficient in marbling, but also is in excess of that ribeye area or in excess of the back fat thickness or hot carcass weight. So this is very telling when we think about trying to increase our overall acceptance rate. The #1 area where producers can make meaningful and measurable progress in terms of their own bottom line for Certified Angus Beef premiums by increasing that acceptance rate, and where we as a brand can really put our focus in trying to grow more supply for that growing consumer demand. Now, we talked about marbling as that #1 factor. We know that marbling is a lifetime event. There are a lot of things that go into marbling, and we see several of those different influences mentioned here on the screen. But one that I will talk about just very briefly is in the form of genetics. We know that marbling is a highly heritable trait. Roughly about 40% of what influences your marbling overall is based on genetics. We know that has to be coupled with high quality health, nutrition, overall management of those cattle. But the best way to start out with a clean slate and good potential is to start out with high quality genetics. So if you are a seed stock producer looking to leverage the marbling genetics that you've worked very hard to propagate, or if you are a commercial cow-calf producer who is simply looking for an easy visual way to identify some of those registered Angus bulls that have a higher likelihood of influencing your overall Certified Angus Beef acceptance rate, I did want to take a minute to mention the targeting the brand logo. Now, I think it's important to talk about what this logo is not as well as what it is. This is a logo that is approved for use on registered Angus bulls to market those bulls that meet the 2 minimum thresholds, our marbling EPD and the dollar grid index. When we look at the long-term goals of the brand, we realize that we probably need to move that 35% acceptance rate closer to a 50% acceptance rate if we want to keep up with the growing consumer demand for quality. So the way we selected these 2 numbers is we looked at more than 8,600 data points of sire identified carcasses and evaluated what was the minimum marbling EPD and dollar grid index needed in order for the progeny of those bulls to hit a 50% Certified Angus Beef acceptance rate. And this is ultimately where those 2 numbers landed. Realize that this logo is not something that would be on actual product itself. This just goes on those live animals. It's only approved for those registered Angus genetics. And it's not a guarantee that 100% of the offspring of those bulls will automatically qualify for the brand. It is simply a way to help more easily identify some of those genetics. Now, There are avenues through the American Angus Association's program of Angus Link that this logo could be utilized on feeder cattle that meet genetic thresholds. For more information on that, I would encourage you to go to anguslink.com. But again, if you're a seed stock producer, we do have marketing resources available to you if you're looking to try and draw a little bit more attention to some of those bulls for the customers who are trying to increase their overall certified Angus beef acceptance rate. The last thing that I'll leave you with is a little bit of a lead into the next topic on our following webinars. We know that all these things we've talked about, from creating high quality consumer demand, having a high quality tracking system in place for brand integrity, applying all 10 of those specifications to the brand. What that ultimately boils down to is we know that quality pays. There is a message that has been clearly sent from consumers to producers today that high quality beef is worth more to them and they're willing to pay more for it. We also know that progressive management requires a little bit of progressive marketing sometimes. And our next webinar, which is going to be on January 21st at 1:30 p.m. Central with my colleague, Paul Dykstra, he's going to spend some time talking about grid marketing, how to understand that a little bit more. And then also if you're getting your own carcass data back and that's a new process to you, he'll talk through about how to better understand that carcass data, what it means and how you can utilize that information to make some meaningful management decisions on your own as well. Again, if you're interested in some more information on either targeting the brand, or if you would like to go back and reference those specifications, I would encourage you to follow along with any of our social channels for cabcattle.com or the Certified Angus Beef brand Cattleman Connection. Again, this webinar will be recorded and housed on cabcattle.com if you'd like to go back and reference it again, or if you'd simply like to share with some of your own customers or colleagues. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and have a minute to walk through some questions. All right, so I'm looking through our chat and some of the questions. Please bear with me. Okay, related to 2020 brand sales, does the drop off in 2020 have anything to do with imports coming into our country, or can it directly be related to COVID? That's a very good question. So I'll address that kind of in two different pieces and parts because there are a lot of dynamics at play there. I would say we can say with a lot of confidence that that drop off in 2020 is very directly related to COVID. When we break things out and look at overall brand sales, the drop has all been on the food service side of things. We saw our food service restaurant partners take a nosedive overnight. That drop off is not because there is imported product coming in that is displacing sales of certified Angus beef. We know that whether it's certified Angus beef or just beef imports, exports in general, that different countries across the globe merchandise the carcass in different ways. We know there are cuts of certified Angus beef that we can add more dollars to the pocket of producers by merchandising those cuts overseas in a culture or a country where they are simply more valuable or in higher demand than they are domestically. That plays a very important part in the overall cutout. We see a lot of the imported product that's coming in that would be sold at a retail level is that lower quality product. And so we know that imports and exports are very important to the sustainability of our brand because in many ways we're able to again add more value to that cutout by merchandising portions of the carcass overseas. And that big drop, we would say very confidently, single-handedly related to COVID. So great question. Next question, when Certified Angus Beef conducts consumer research, how does that happen? And have some questions about the average sample size. Again, that's a great question. So we pay attention to a lot of different things with our consumer research and obviously have to be have to be fair and impartial to do things across the country. There are certain portions of the country where we have higher market penetration, whether that's through retail or food service. We try to do our consumer research in a way that touches some of those markets where we are very heavily penetrated, along with some of those where we are not. We want to be able to have a clear perspective of how is that logo recognized, how is the quality perceived, both in those markets where we have a lot of partners and those where we do not, and all of that information is collaborated together. I will be the first to admit to you that I am not the internal guru on how all of our research works, but I would be more than happy to follow up and get a little bit more information on overall sample size, because sometimes our research sample size will depend on what the question is that we are asking. Are we interested in simply logo recognition? In 2020, we've done a lot of research to learn more about consumer habits on online ordering or curbside pickup and things that are very relevant to what's going on in the marketplace today. And so sample sizes are going to vary significantly, but we do work with a couple of different third-party research companies to make sure that everything we do is going through their filters to be statistically significant and relevant, and not just going out there and handpicking a couple of opinions that we like to hear. We want to make sure that we're working with those accredited research facilities that are giving us credible data to go off of. Have a question here about tenderness. How does tenderness play into the Certified Angus Beef brand? Also a very excellent question. We know that tenderness is very important to the consumer in terms of a part of their palatability. Today, with those 10 specifications that we have in place, a Warner-Bressler shear force test or that test that would measure tenderness is not part of that specification, because there's not a good way at the speed of commerce at the packing plant to pull any kind of a shear force test. However, we do a lot of continued research. We have meat scientists on staff who do a lot of continued research to make sure that the specifications we have in place today are in some form or fashion accommodating for tenderness. And we know that marbling has a lot to do with the palatability of perceived tenderness, because that marbling equates to lubrication in the palatability process. And when we have high quality marbling there, along with marbling texture, which is another one of our specifications. We do require a medium to fine marbling texture, because when you get into that more coarse marbling texture, that's when you can certainly run into some perceived tenderness issues when you get that more coarse bite. So that's another way that we bring tenderness into the consideration to make sure that customer always has that high quality eating experience. Have another question here. Does Certified Angus Beef recognize prime/choice, or is it just marked as Certified Angus Beef? Also a great question. So that modest or higher minimum marbling specification for Certified Angus Beef, that accounts for the upper 2 tiers of the marbling requirements that are within USDA choice. Again, we've got those other 9 standards that exceed beyond the USDA choice requirements, but we do also have a Certified Angus Beef brand prime extension, which is all 10 of the Certified Angus Beef specifications, plus that extra threshold of being prime level marbling. So we do have that additional shield for Certified Angus Beef brand prime. That's been very important for us from a brand positioning perspective. Really started out as being very important for those white tablecloth restaurant owners who really wanted a way to showcase how the brand can still go above and beyond USDA prime, because we have all of those extra specifications for uniformity, sizing, muscle conformation that all come into play. But recently, as we've seen producers step up and really answer the call of supplying high quality beef, we've even seen a lot of retailers who have brought on the Certified Angus Beef brand prime extension as a way to offer their customers even that higher level of quality yet. So that would be the one place where we do segregate for that even more discerning customer who wants the same level of Certified Angus Beef with just that little extra kick of marbling to it. Have a question here about the average premium that producers will see from packers if they qualify for certified Angus beef specifications. We see roughly $50 per head on average. We know that packers are paying over $75 million annually in premiums. And again, we don't get involved in any of the pricing or setting those premiums, but those are directly related to what the consumer demand has driven back to that cutout value. Again, when we talk about premiums, grid marketing and interpreting any of that grid data on your certified Angus beef premiums that you might be getting back on your carcass data, would definitely encourage you to tune in January 21st as Paul Dykstra kind of dives into a lot of the nitty gritty of that. Obviously, we see some seasonality, but that would certainly be the average that you would see across the board. Got lots of questions still coming in. Okay, to be recognized as certified Angus beef, is it a requirement that the bull be recognized as CAB? Also a good question. So important to discern between that certified Angus beef logo and that targeting the brand logo. From a bull perspective, we always reference that logo or that animal as being a targeting the brand qualified bull, because there's no such thing as a live certified Angus beef animal. It is not a requirement that, I mean, we know cattle aren't coming into the packing plant today with any kind of a birth certificate. So there's no way, we're not verifying that that animal is required to be sired by a targeting the brand bull. That's simply a tool that allows that commercial producer who's trying to increase their acceptance rate as a way to more easily identify those genetics. But that is not one of the live identification requirements when those cattle come into the plant today. Let's see, where can we find out about how to market our cattle to buyers and packers who participate in certified Angus beef? Another great question. Again, I would point you towards that cabcattle.com. We have information there about reputable feeders who have an interest in either purchasing or partnering with high quality commercial producers who are looking to merchandise calves. We realize that retained ownership sometimes is a reality and a good avenue for many commercial producers to capitalize on those certified Angus beef premiums. We also realize that's not always the best scenario for everyone, but there are quality minded feeders who are interested in a wide variety of those types of arrangements. And we have a lot of resources on cabcattle.com to help point you in the right direction to at least start doing your own research. Again, we can't tell you exactly who you must or must not feed those cattle with, but we can certainly point you in the right direction to start making some contacts and figure out what a good partnership might be for you. Same would go for the packing plants as well. Making sure that I'm trying to keep these in order and not miss folks' questions. How does certified Angus beef see the effect of beef on dairy influence calves, and what are their acceptance rates? Another great question, very timely, one that we get a lot of phone calls and a lot of questions about today. So we know that there are a lot of dairies across the country that are trying to upgrade the quality of those purebred dairy cattle that are often at a discount in the feeder calf market, not accepted in many packing plants, and they're utilizing beef semen as a way to upgrade those F1s, those beef on dairy calves. One of the specifications we did not spend a significant amount of time on today is our moderately thick or thicker muscling characteristic. So one of the biggest challenges that we see with dairy influenced calves, especially those purebred dairy calves, is that they have a more angular shape to that longismus dorsi muscle, that ribeye or strip area. We know that those cattle will oftentimes marble very well. About a third of USDA prime is made up of dairy influenced cattle. But that moderately thick or thicker muscling specification is there to make sure that we have superior muscled cattle that are coming into the certified Angus beef brand. Quite honestly, that's whether those are purebred Angus cattle or whether or not they have dairy influence in them. We want to make sure that we have that superior muscling confirmation so that from a plate presentation perspective, we don't wind up with really angular strips and ribs. Now, I will tell you that that specification does not eliminate 100% of dairy influence. We know that there are some cattle of those beef on dairy cattle that may meet all 10 of our specifications. To your question about how many of them qualify, to be very candid, that's data that we don't have today because this is a different population of cattle that we see coming through today. There's still a lot of information to be learned on them. But I will tell you that specification is there to ensure that the cattle that are winding up in a certified Angus beef box are those cattle that are inheriting more influence of the Angus portion of their genetics into their skeletal makeup. So as a brand, we exist to increase demand for registered Angus cattle. We know that a lot of these dairies that are breeding beef on dairy cattle today are investing a significant amount of money in registered Angus genetics in order to try and upgrade the quality of those calves. And so from a brand mission perspective, there is value that can be created for the registered Angus breeder who's trying to take advantage of merchandising those genetics for a customer who wants to upgrade the quality of those feeder cattle. Now, we know they have to be able to perform across all 10 of those specifications, but that is a reality that we see in a portion of our supply today. Let's see, how is marbling texture measured? So this will be an example of, and this is something that the USDA grader, again, that approved camera grading would be taking a look at. Basically, we're looking at the density of that marbling between the 12th and 13th rib, making sure that we don't have portions of marbling that look more like a lightning strike that goes through that ribeye muscle versus having that medium to fine texture. So that would be a visual appraisal. Let's see. Okay, so there's a question about the increased ribeye allowance. How will the increased ribeye allowance impact the number of eligible cattle for certified Angus beef? So I'm going to make an assumption on this question. And we did release a statement earlier this summer that certified Angus beef would start allowing some plants, if a plant chooses to, if they are willing to go through the work of the segregation and documentation. If a plant chooses to, they do have the option to certify cattle that meet all of the certified Angus beef brand specifications except for our ribeye area, meaning if those cattle meet everything except they have too large of a ribeye, they are allowed to merchandise the rest of the carcass as certified Angus beef, as long as they agree to not utilize those ribs and strips. So basically those cuts that would be most negatively impacted by an excess of ribeye area, they have to be removed. They cannot be sold as certified Angus beef, but they would have the option, if they chose to merchandise the rest of the carcass likewise. So to the question about how do we see that impacting the overall number of cattle qualifying, I will tell you that there is a lot of potential there. At this point, we have not seen, pardon me, at this point, we have not seen a tremendous amount of uptake from plants who have said it's going to work in their processes yet to make that segregation. So I would say, while it is an allowance today, it is not something that has been adopted at a rate that's allowing us to increase supply significantly. But the first thing we have to do is be able to make that decision to make that allowance and make sure the systems get in place. So today, I would say we don't have a great answer for you. That's been pretty new, and we haven't seen a lot of adaptation of that option. Not a lot of people implementing that, but the option is there, and we look forward to having more information as we see some plants pick that up and perhaps put it into use. Okay, a couple other questions here. Very good. Can my grass-fed and never ever 3 cattle make certified Angus beef? So it's a great question. I will say that we do have a certified Angus beef brand natural extension, which is still all 10 of those carcass specifications for certified Angus beef. Plus, it is an audited program that is a no added hormones never given any antibiotics, and a strict vegetarian diet, which would be a third-party audited program for those markets, for that consumer demographic who still values the quality level, as well as values some of those additional claims. Now, to your question about whether or not those cattle qualify for certified Angus beef, they can be a candidate for certified Angus beef natural through a never ever program, but at the end of the day, they still have to meet all 10 of those carcass specifications. To the question about, grass fed, I would say, is it a true grass finished? Pardon me. Or is it a grass fed grain finished program? We do not have any specific feeding requirements for the management of our cattle outside of those natural cattle that cannot be fed any kind of animal byproducts. They have to have that strict vegetarian diet, no feed grade antibiotics or anything like that. But we also know that grain finished marbling is typically what it takes to get across the threshold of certified Angus beef. If you're interested in more information about candidates for the Certified Angus Beef Natural Program, I would encourage you to drop your email in that Q&A box, and we'd be more than happy to follow up with you on any additional information there. Question here, I assume again about the ribeye. Isn't bigger better? Why isn't a bigger ribeye more valuable? And that is a great question. And this is one of the great struggles that we see within our business on what's best for the consumer, what's best for the producer. We realize that in order to encourage producers to make ribeyes smaller, there has to be a financial signal there. And we know that yield pays a lot of bills. And in many cases, a larger ribeye is very helpful from that yield perspective. So to your question about isn't bigger always better, here's a little bit of insight about why we put that 10 to 16 square inch ribeye requirement on certified Angus beef products. This is very important, especially to our food service partners. We know that plate presentation and the ability to have a consistent product in their restaurant is really, really important. And if you and I were to go to dinner and we both sit down and order a 16-ounce ribeye, and if you get a ribeye that is this nice, 13 to 15 inch face cut ribeye that's cut nice and thick, and then I get the State Fair ribeye, I call them the pancake ribeyes. They have to slice them really thin to get to that same ounce cut. I'm probably going to feel a little bit gypped because I got a really thin steak versus that very thick plate presentation. So plate presentation is a lot of why we have that specification in place. And there are ways that we can merchandise bigger ribeyes, but the real problem comes into play if you have an 18-inch ribeye and a 12-inch ribeye that wind up in the same box together. Those are two very, very different cuts of beef. And when we look at even how beef is packaged from the plant or that distributor to the end user, they might have a very specific weight that they're trying to hit with those cases. And if you put one really, really big ribeye in there, what do you try and do to average out your case size? You toss a couple small ribeyes in there too. If I'm a chef and I open that up in the back of my restaurant, I look at this and I think, gosh, this looks really, really inconsistent. Now I have a problem on my hand. So that would be the reason why we do put that range on the ribeyes, to make sure that we're getting that customer a consistent range every single time. Great question. Let's see. Have a question here about whether or not we have any data on if increased participation in the Angus Link program has shown an increase in quality for certified Angus beef. And also a question about various PVPs and premiums. I would say from a PVP premium, I am not an expert in that. I will speak very briefly here on data about increased participation in Angus Link versus certified Angus beef acceptance rates. Realize that when we're looking at a feeder calf marketing program, we know that carcass performance is only, it's just one of the things that we're trying to measure in the profitability and performance of those calves. We also have their health things that come into play. We want to make sure those cattle are going to gain well when they go into the feed yard. There are a lot of different things on the menu for Angus Link that can be selected. I would tell you today, we are in the process of following through with some more of those cattle to look at overall certified Angus beef acceptance rates. But please realize that within that Angus Link marketing program, there's more than just marbling and carcass performance that's involved there. And so we can't tie all of those mutually exclusively together. Again, from a PVP perspective, I would encourage you to visit anguslink.com, where they have more information about the different PVP marketing options and which of those may be more profitable depending on your various marketing outlet. All right. As I'm multitasking and sorting through here, it does look like, I believe we have covered a better chunk of what was asked live. If we did not answer your question, or if it got buried in that Q&A, I would encourage you again, drop us a note there with your email address. We'd be more than happy to follow up with you. Follow along on cabcattle.com and all of our social channels. We'd love to stay in touch. Thank you guys for tuning in today. We look forward to seeing you down the road. Again, tune in on January 21st as Paul Dykstra picks up on our next topic, and we hope to see you down the road. Have a great day.